Writing the Essay, a step-by-step guide for getting an A.
Hi everybody, it's Mr. Swirlo, and I'm here to help you go through your essay. I know right about now you're probably freaking out and thinking you don't know anything, but trust me, you guys know more than you give yourself credit for. Writing an essay is a really difficult process, but it goes along much smoother if you take things one step at a time.
You're going to be writing a 2-paragraph essay about the similarities and differences between the greasers and the socials and the outsiders. Before we can start, you have to select 3 supporting ideas for your paragraph on similarities, and then 3 for your paragraph on differences. They can be the same 3, but they don't have to be. These are some of the topics that I would consider using. They're all big picture ideas, like valuing friendship. Both the greasers and the socials believe in friendship. There's the relationship between Ponyboy and Johnny, the relationship between Bob the Soch and his best buddy Randy. There's even the romantic relationship between Bob the Soch and Cherry. You might also talk about how both groups express emotions, even though they express their emotions differently. The greasers, for example, show too much emotion, and the Soches try not to show any. They still both have their own ways of expressing emotions. They have similar behaviors if you think about it too. For example, the greasers and Soches both like to fight, swear, steal. They also have similar activities and interests. They both go to drive-in movies. They both like to fight. They like to do things that are illegal. So the two groups, even though when you look at them specifically are very different, they also have a lot of things in common. Both groups are labeled because of their social class. The greasers are poor, and the world sees them as hoods. The Socs are wealthy, and they end up acting spoiled and entitled, but they feel like that creates an extra responsibility for them, something that they have to live up to. So they're constantly looking for ways of breaking the rules. Also, both groups have values. The greasers believe that you should stick up for your buddies no matter what. They believe that a gang is a group of friends who stick together. When one of their own is in trouble, like Dally, they'll stick up for him. If Ponyboy's in trouble, you know Johnny's going to come to his rescue. But what happens when Bob the Soch is killed? Do his friends stay around? When you look at the big picture ideas, it's a little bit easier to see the similarities, and when you look much closer, it's easier to see the differences. Let's take a closer look at the topic of expressing emotions. Even though they express their emotions in different ways, both gangs have feelings and are sensitive to the many difficult experiences they face throughout the novel. Ponyboy fights with his brother, feels unloved, and loses his best friend. Confused and bewildered, he struggles to grip hold of reality. Similarly, Cherry struggles to feel a genuine connection with her friends, has to impress her parents, and loses her boyfriend. Until his best friend dies, Randy complains that he can't feel anything. When Bob is killed, Randy doesn't know how to process his emotions. Once you've selected your 3 supporting ideas for each paragraph, it's time to go step by step through the process of outlining. Step 1, choose your examples. Step 2, choose a quote that proves your example. And step 3, describe the context, meaning the situation in which your quote occurs. For example, if I choose behavior for my supporting idea for similarities, then my example of behavior is that both gangs like to fight. Isn't that true? Isn't fighting an example of similar behavior? Good. Step 2. Now I have to include a quote that proves that both gangs like to fight. I used Two-Bit Says, comma quotation, skin fighting isn't rough, it's the best way to blow off steam. And then step 3, I have to explain when this quote occurred. For the reader to really understand the reference you're about to make, They have to know when the quote occurred in the story, and perhaps which characters were involved. So this quote from Two-Bit happened when Ponyboy, Johnny, and Two-Bit are at the drive-in with Cherry and Marcia. Even though you're taking the steps in that order, this is not the order that you'll present the information in for your outline or your essay, but you should fill out the outline in that order. When you do it for your outline, it's going to be context first, so you can introduce your example. When Pony, Johnny, and Two-Bit are at the drive-in with Cherry and Marcia, Two-Bit explains how both gangs like to fight. Then I can give my quote. Two-Bit says, "Skin fighting isn't rough. It's the best way to blow off steam." When you're ready to write the essay, you'll end up removing the outline and connect the parts together. For example, when Ponyboy, Johnny, and Two-Bit are at the drive-in with Cherry and Marcia, Two-Bit explains how both gangs like to fight. Two-Bit says, "Skin fighting isn't rough. It's the best way to blow off steam." That's just one supporting idea, so you'll have to go through that process 6 times for the entire essay. Just keep going one step at a time, and you'll do great. Compare and contrast. Comparing, or similarities, and contrasting, which refers to differences, requires finding 2 pieces of evidence, or quotes, for each social group. For example, if I want to prove that 2 people are similar because of their behavior, I have to prove that both people like to fight. If I can find one quote that proves this, I don't need to find another one. However, if I can't, then I need to find another quote. If that quote is from a different moment in the story, then I'll also need to introduce the context for that quote separately. For example, take a look below. The second time it says context, earlier when Ponyboy is walking home from the movies, that introduces the quote that I'm going to use to prove that Socias like to fight too. I use the quote on page 2. Ponyboy says, comma quotation, "We get jumped by the Socias." That proves how Socias like to jump greasers. Socias like to beat up greasers, in the same way that a greaser probably likes to beat up Socias. But before I can give that quote, I have to tell you when it happens. First, I think, whoa, it happens before page 29, so I could say earlier. I could also tell the reader what's happening when that quote occurs. In chapter 1, on page 2, Ponyboy's walking home from the movie theaters. There are other ways of describing it, but that's a good start. Your essay test is worth 100 points overall, broken down into 10 categories worth 10 points each. The first category is for topic sentences. I practically give them to you if you can remember them. Next are your supporting ideas. There will be a total of 6 of these, followed by context, examples, quotes and details, transitions, mechanics, which refers to your grammar and punctuation, speaker identification, organization, and originality. The following presentation takes some time to introduce you to each one of these categories and lets you know what exactly you have to do. I've included a sample outline on my Homework Hero website on the download section. Download a copy and try printing it in color, that way you can follow along. You'll notice that I've given you the main idea. In The Outsiders, there are many similarities between the greasers and the socials. You're welcome to use this if you can remember it. Supporting idea A was up to you. I decided to compare appearances. If I said the greasers and the socias have similar appearances, I'd be wrong. They have very different appearances. So instead I say first, the greasers and the socias are defined by their appearance. Before I can give context, I have to think of the quote I want to use. Ponyboy says, comma quotation, "Our hair labeled us as greasers. It's our trademark." Thinking back to when this happened in the story, I recall that it was when Ponyboy and Johnny are about to cut their hair off in the church. The example that I'm trying to show is that they're afraid that they won't look like greasers anymore if they cut their hair off. This is an example of how they're defined by their appearance. Now I have to prove the same thing is true for the socias. The quote that I want to use is on the same page. Ponyboy says, "Maybe we couldn't have Corvairs or Madras shirts, but we can have our hair." This proves that just like greasers are defined by their hair, socias are defined by their Madras shirts, and their Corvairs. The next supporting idea that I chose was interests. I'm going to say that the Socias and the Greasers both have similar interests. The quote that I want to use is about the basic sameness that Ponyboy notices on page 37. When does this happen? In chapter 3, when Pony is talking to Cherry. So I include that for my context. The example that I'm trying to prove is that he realizes that Socias also like cars, music, and movies. This is an example of how they have similar interests. Now I want to prove something for the Socias. The quote I want to use says, Pony says, "It seemed funny to me that Socias were just like us." This was on the same page as the previous quote, so I don't really have to give a new context. Instead, I just say a little word about what Pony thinks. Supporting idea C compares behavior. The Greasers and the Socias have similar behavior. Before I go any further, I'm going to take a moment and just direct your attention to the column on the left. Please note that it's really important that as you go through this process, you take the time to note who's the one speaking. Notice how in green I've highlighted the words "who is speaking." Every time you see green appear, either in this PowerPoint slide or on this sample outline, you'll notice that that's identifying the speaker. It's really important that as you go through your essay, you don't just have any dangling quotes. Make sure to tell me who's saying the quote. Back to supporting idea C, similar behaviors. The example that I want to give of similar behaviors is that Two-Bit says they both like to fight. I'm trying to think about when this happens, and then I realize that this quote is on page 29 while they're at the drive-in movie theaters with some of the Soch girls. To set up the context, I say when Johnny, Pony, and Two-Bit are at the drive-in with Cherry and Marcia. And the quote I want to give is, Two-Bit says, "Skin fighting isn't rough, it's the best way to blow off steam." I probably need a little bit more information because that doesn't say too much specifically, and I still need something that demonstrates that Socias also like to fight. I'm going to pick something again from the same scene. Here, for context, I simply say, "in that same scene." The quote that I'm going to give is about how the Socias rumble in their social classes. It's from the same page, but I need some kind of example of how the Socias also have similar behavior. So I say that Two-Bit explains that Socias also like to fight. It's simple, but also liking to fight is an example of how they have similar behavior. Now that I've provided my context and my example, I'm really ready to go on to my last and final quote for this paragraph. The quote that I'm going to give, again, Two-Bit says, comma quotation. I could also change that around a little bit and get creative. Instead of saying says, I might say he remarks, he comments, he describes. In this case, I chose he remarks, comma quotation. Socias rumble in their social clubs. I don't have to use the whole quote. I could use just enough to demonstrate the point. And in this case, the point is that both Socias and Greasers like to fight.